Contemplating the idea of interdependence brought me to today's theme. As we find ourselves in the midst of the annual stewardship campaign, we are compelled to think about what we bring in service to one another as a voluntary fellowship of spiritual seekers. Without doubt, we need one another in creating and supporting religious community and right relationship. How we are in relationship with one another and with the whole of our religious community is the oil that consecrates interdependency in a spiritual sense, and which in a practical sense reduces the inevitable friction of humans living together in community. By our covenant, we gather, promising one another our commitment to be together and to support the whole. Our aspirations in this regard are reflected in the words of the covenant we recite each Sunday. Love is the doctrine of this faith. The quest for truth, its sacrament, service, its prayer, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love. And to that end, shall we grow into harmony. We recite this every Sunday, yet as imperfect creatures, we know we will make mistakes, miss the mark, misunderstand our calling. So our covenant reminds us that we need one another. Our covenant calls us ever back into right relationship, into mutually respectful and kind relationship. Relationship forged in love, that big capital L universal love. And that's the gift of interdependence. Now, expressed by our seventh principle, as it reads, we affirm and promote respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. The wording expresses a global sphere of community that includes countless living creatures and the ecosystems that support life. As individual human beings, as Unitarian Universalists, respect is about all we can manage on that scale, because it's too big to be accountable for. For me, there's an inference here in looking at interdependence as relational. The call becomes a commitment to create nurturing relationships of care and respect. It starts with smaller spheres of relationship and works outward. And in this way, it is possible to work to repair any harm we might have done with our missteps, repair any damaged relationships with our mistakes. Interdependence is the value expressed of the seventh principle in the changes proposed to Article 2. That is Article 2 of the Unitarian Universalist bylaws. So that's a concern of governance at a higher level. But in what we live out, interdependence, the emphasis is on the relational. Now, switching gears here a bit, our worship theme for the month of February is the gifts of justice and equity. And when we look at interdependence through the lens of justice and equity, we are compelled to acknowledge our responsibility toward one another in our daily living. The implication for us as Unitarian Universalists is to understand the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." So if we understand that interdependent web of existence and the interdependence of our relationships with one another in our communities of congregations, and perhaps in relation to the wider spheres in our community beyond these walls, we understand that we're all connected. Interdependence means being connected to one another so that what we do, the choices that we make, the power that we have to make those choices, we need to understand or be aware of how our choices affect others in this web of existence. And of course, when you think about how complex natural ecosystems are and how easy it is to knock them out of balance, it's just as nuanced and subtle at times to understand how the choices that we make individually and on different levels and different spheres of community, how we can affect others and unwittingly create injustice for others. Dr. King understood that we are tied together in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. So for we as human beings in this current, I guess, century and a half, we can't get away from this idea of mutuality. What we do and what has happened in the past affects the now, and it affects systems, and it affects how people live. But we can kind of see this mutuality and our choices we make in a wonderful parable that comes from the Jewish tradition, the parable of the spoons. So this parable has been actually written in many languages and in many cultures, and so it gets changed. If this is not one that you're used to, it might not be one that you're familiar with in your culture. But here's the story. An old woman is nearing the end of her life, and as she closes her eyes one night, she sees a bright light and is transported to another realm. She doesn't pass away just then. Instead, she returns to the living world to find her family gathered at her bedside. She smiles and whispers to her children, "I have seen the great hereafter." "The great whereafter?" her son asks. "Heaven and hell, I have seen them both." The old woman goes on to explain, "I came upon a door, and behind it was hell. What I saw there confounded me. There was a dining hall filled with rows of tables, each table teeming with a magnificent feast. It looked and smelled delicious, yet the people seated around the tables were emaciated and sickly, moaning with hunger. As I came closer, I realized that each person held a very long spoon. With it, they could reach the feast, but the spoon was too long. With it, they could reach the feast, but the spoon was too long. So they tried again and again, they couldn't bring nourishment to their mouth. In spite of the abundance before them, they were starving. She said, I left that horrid place and I opened a new door, one that led to heaven. And inside I was surprised to see that the very same scene before my eyes, a dining hall filled with row upon row of tables, and on those tables a marvelous feast. But instead of moaning with hunger, the people around the tables were sitting contentedly, talking with one another, sated from the abundance before them. Like those in hell, she said, these people were holding very long spoons. And as I watched, a woman dipped her spoon into a bowl of stew before her, but rather than struggling to feed herself, she extended her spoon out and fed the man seated across from her. This person, now satisfied and no longer hungry, gave thanks and returned the favor, leaning across the table to feed the woman. The old woman said, suddenly I understood the difference between heaven and hell. It is neither the qualities of place nor the abundance of resources, but the way people treat each other. She finished by saying, in hell we are selfish. We would rather go hungry than give the people we don't care for the pleasure of eating. But in heaven, we feed each other. We put trust in those around us and never go hungry. So reflected in this parable is a duality of our human experience in which sorrow and joy are both possibilities. We can choose fear, and in particular, fear of scarcity, which creates anguish for those who are in community with us, or we can choose to think in terms of abundance, which creates bliss for all. And similar to the message that Ron Roth gave us last week, our choices and our perspectives shape our reality and affect the way we are in community with one another. And when choice and power are combined, the effects can be devastating. Ron gave us another example, the insidious banality reflected in the movie Zone of Interest, where bizarrely the family of the Auschwitz commandant lives behind a walled garden in idyllic surroundings next door to the prison camp's incinerators. Truly, that is a hell on earth. Now, conversely, heaven on earth is possible. So this is what Dr. King called beloved community, and he wasn't trying to say, envision a world in which it was not a utopia, never trouble. That's not the idea. The idea is that we would feed each other and our relationships would be the best that we could make them. So I do believe, I believe that our values as Unitarian Universalists, if we were able to live them out with perfection, the world over, we would have beloved community. But of course, we are a long, long way from that. And Dr. King acknowledged that by saying that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So when we think about heaven on earth being a long way off, and we think of the communities in which people choose to feed one another out of what can be shared, and those who don't, we know that heaven is not close. And heaven is not close where poverty exists. Muhammad Yunus, Bangladeshi creator of microlending for micro businesses, refers to poverty as a structural violence because of what people experience by not having a constant state of not having needs met, basic needs met. And he said a poverty-free world is possible because poverty is not created by people, by poor people. It's created and sustained by the economic and social systems that we have designed for ourselves, the institutions and concepts that make up that system, the policies that we pursue. So poverty levels, we know, are high compared to the wealth of our nation, and we know that wealth gaps exist between people of color and ethnicity. They're real. They can be tracked and documented. And we have only to read Matthew Desmond on U.S. fiscal and social policy to understand the nuances of why poverty persists and why poor people do not create the poverty they live in. But that kind of detail is not for the pulpit. But I ask you to let's ask ourselves, what does this point to? Over the last 4 Saturdays, member Jim Smith presented a series of presentations called Freedom School, and he did an excellent job of inviting people from Boca Raton and neighboring communities to speak on their areas of expertise and experience in economics, healthcare, education, and housing, in that order. Each expert was a person of color who spoke on their family and community experience of these systems in which they work and navigate. And their stories made real how social and fiscal policies of cities, counties, states, and in some cases, federal jurisdictions were adverse to them. So just one quick example, the cane, the companies that produce sugar from cane are concentrated mostly in Palm Beach County on the west side in the Everglades. And in order to process the cane, they burn it, and they burn the refuse. And it creates ash that's similar to ash that comes off of a volcanic eruption. It's dense and thick, and it is, they have to have troopers out there on the main roads to make sure that people get by safely because you can't see. And it's actually, you can feel the burn, you can feel the heat. And there's lots of particulates in the air, and if you aren't protected, you breathe that in. And that's a problem for a lot of people who breathe that in seasonally, year in and year out. The county health department will issue a warning for an algae bloom for cyanobacteria, but they will not issue a warning for cane burning. Palm Beach County Health Department. This On their website, they say they are concerned for the health and well-being of every person in their county. But it doesn't say except the citizens of Belglade. In order for, I have never been to the Everglades, the real Everglades out there by Lake Okeechobee. Has anybody else? Okay. What did you do there? Gleaning, okay. That means picking up agriculture that gets not harvested and giving it to food pantries and so forth. Anybody else? Okay. Anybody else? Canoeing, all right. Recently? Okay. Oh, nice. So, Linda Prentice went out there to get her driver's license because she could get an appointment, which says something, right? So we have to get proximate to some of the ways in which these systems work against folks. And in order to understand all of the nuances and the complexities. Yesterday, Angela McDonald sat here and talked to us about Dixie Manor and preserving it as affordable housing. And it was really complex. I know that people they came to the mic and they said, clarify this, clarify that, right? And unless we bring ourselves to these issues and these situations, we will not understand the extent to which we are allowing injustices to exist, and they cannot help but affect our own flourishing. I want to end on a hopeful note, though. We recently benefited DISC, which is an organization in Boca Raton that is committed to bringing diverse people together. This is their mission, to promote justice in the community, to support community leaders, to share with the poor, and to acknowledge the presence and power of God in their work. I wrote a remittance letter to them, and I was curious about this piece to acknowledge the presence and power of God. And I looked up everything that had to do with justice in the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures. And there is an idea that when you endeavor to be at the side of someone in need, you are not only making their lives better, you're making your own life better. Generosity expands and grows us spiritually. Helping others expands us, grows us in emotional maturity. standing beside, being with, being among those who struggle creates solidarity and connects us in a way that is countercultural in our society. A disconnection that hurts us. So I will end with, let us find some way, even if it is putting money in the basket to support the organizations that do this work, let us find some way to be connected with everybody in our small universe here. May it be so.